This is our Srimad Bhagavatam program. And currently we are reading the prayers of Personified Vedas. These are the beautiful prayers, and they are from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 87, from verse 1 to 50. Today we have Prashanth Prabhu, a very wonderful and a sincere devotee, who will be presenting the verses and his realizations. Hare Krishna, Prashanth Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you, Mataji, for this opportunity. We will start with we're going to go through, like Mataji said, prayers of Personified Vedas, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 87, to verses 1 to 50. And then we will start with communication prayers. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prachayani Nirvishesha Shunyamadi Paschati Devastati Jai Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaurav Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. And because we're reading from Bhagavatam, we will say Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Thank you, Mataji, Sir Prabhu, Mataji devotees, for this opportunity. Again, forgive me if I make any mistakes.
Prashanth Prabhuji, before you start speaking, your voice is little not very clear, at least to me. Could you keep the mic very close to your mouth?
Yes, Prabhuji. Is that better?
Much better, yeah.
Okay, Prabhuji. Okay, devotees, so we'll get started. So we are looking at prayers of Personified Vedas. So just going before we start, this is the background, right, of what's happening. So Maharaj Parikshit is asking Sri Sukadev Goswami this question, and Sri Sukadev Goswami is narrating, is going back and answering the question by bringing up something that a pastime of Narada Muni. And in that story, there's another level where Narada Muni is listening to Narayana Rishi, and Narayana Rishi is reciting an answer that was given by the sages that were discussing this very same topic in Janaloka. So that's the background behind these verses. And go to the first verse here. So Shri Parikshit Vasha Brahman Brahmani Anirvisye Nirgune Guna Rittayaha Tatam Sharanti Shrutayaha Sakshat Sad Asata Pare. So Shri Parikshit said, "O Brahmana, how can the Vedas directly describe the Supreme Absolute Truth, who cannot be described in words? The Vedas are limited to describing the qualities of material nature, but the Supreme is devoid of these qualities, being transcendental to all material manifestations and their causes." And translation by Srila Prabhupada. So, like I said, the background, right, is King Parikshit asking Sukadev Goswami how the Vedas can directly refer to the Supreme Absolute Truth, Brahman. And especially since, a majority of the Vedas are what in Bhagavad Gita Krishna says is like flowery language. It deals with material nature, it deals with material progression, and it deals with the three modes of material nature and how to get out of and how to pursue sense gratification while still being in those three modes for gradual progression. So King Parikshit is asking this question. It's a very valid question, right? We hear when we are listening and reading that sometimes that the Lord's qualities are innumerable, right? There's so many opulences to the Lord, and the Lord is beyond our imagination. So King Parikshit, Maharaj Parikshit is asking, okay, well, if that's the case, how can we actually understand, how can the Vedas actually capture the Supreme Lord through words? And the other thing that he says, that Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, is the Supreme Lord is devoid of any material qualities, right? So the Supreme Lord is devoid of anything that the Vedas primarily speak about, and then the Lord is transcendental to all the material manifestations, which is primarily what the Vedas speak about. So going a little bit deeper into the purport here, right? So Srila Prabhupada kind of explains why Parikshit is asking this question. I think it's important for us to know that as well. And Prabhupada first gives some background of how words have multiple meanings, right? And we see this in the English language, and same thing in Sanskrit. He says there's three kinds of expressive capacities called sabdavitis, which is, there's a literal primary dictionary meaning of a word, metaphorical meaning, and then meaning extended by similarity, which Prabhupada uses the word, like if we say something is lion-like, then we know what the qualities of a lion are, and we can ascertain the same qualities of whatever we're describing as lion-like. So when even simple words have so many different meanings, right? And Vedas themselves are full of these qualitative descriptions that could be that any of these meanings could be used. But at the end of the day, Brahman, which is the Supreme Lord, is nirguna, or without qualities, but Brahman is also sad asat param, which is beyond all causes and effects. So when there's these multiple sort of conflicting understandings of words, and then there's also this understanding that there's full of qualitative descriptions of things, but also things that should be understood as not having qualities. That's where Maharaj Parikshit's question is coming from. So how could we possibly interpret, the words of these Vedas when there's all these multiple meanings? And how could the Vedas describe the absolute truth when the absolute truth in certain perspectives is not understandable? So ultimately, right, Parikshit is asking, how can we hope to understand Krishna through the Vedas? So that's kind of the background of the question and why we're asking it. So it really helps us think about, what the true purpose of the Vedas is, right? Is if we understand the purpose of the Vedas, then we can then hope to understand what we can take away from the words within the Vedas themselves, and hope to then understand Krishna, who is described in these Vedas. So in the, like I mentioned before, right? So there's Narada Muni is asking the question, and the sages of Janaloka are Narayana Rishi is explaining the pastime from some of the sages in Janaloka, and the sage that speaks is Sri Sanandana, and what he recites are the prayers of the personified Vedas, which is what the actual prayers are. So the first verse is 87:14. So it starts with Sri Shrutaya Jaya Jaya Jayi Ajam Ajitosa Kripta Gunam Tvam Asiyad Atmana Samarvadutta Samatabhaha Samastabhaha Aga Jagat O Aga Jagat Okasham Akila Sati Avabodh Bhoghate Te Kavichad Ajay Atmana Chacharot Nuchare Nikamaha. So the Shruti said, "Victory, victory unto you, O unconquerable one, and by your very nature you are perfectly full of all opulences. Therefore, please defeat the eternal power of illusion who assumes control over the modes of nature to create difficulties for conditioned souls. O you who awaken all the energies of the moving and non-moving embodied beings. Sometimes the Vedas can recognize you as you sport your material and spiritual potencies. So this is the first verse that Sri Sanandana is saying, right? So he's saying, and it starts with the Shrutis. So what are these Shrutis? The Shrutis are literally the personified incantations of the incarnations of the Vedas that are singing to wake up the Lord, like Lord Krishna and Lord Vishnu, who's sleeping by glorifying his name. So in the purport, Prabhupada clearly explains, and I think we had several classes where people have gone into what these Shrutis are. These verses are the actual prayers of the first emanation from the breathing of Lord Mahavishnu. So the first thing that comes out of Lord Mahavishnu are these 28 Shrutis, which basically explain all of the things that the Vedas are for. And the first thing these Shrutis actually do is glorify Krishna. And so the Shrutis, which are the purposes of the Vedas, they immediately, the first thing, as soon as they are exhaled from Lord Mahavishnu, the first thing they do is they glorify Krishna, and then the first thing they ask is they ask the Lord to defeat the eternal power of illusion. And the thing I took away from that is we should be doing the same thing every day, right? We should start our day. The first thing of the Vedas when they are exhaled from Lord Krishna and Lord Vishnu is to glorify the Lord. Then we should be doing the same thing every day when we wake up. And same thing we should be doing is asking the Lord to defeat the eternal power of illusion. Anyway, the Shrutis say that Krishna is the one that awakens all the energies, moving and non-moving. So they already established that, Lord Vishnu and Krishna are the supreme controller. And then one of the interesting things in the purport that Prabhupada mentions is that in the Aitreya Upanishad, it says Sa Akshita Tat Tejo Shrita Srijata. And it's explaining how the material universe came about, and the answer is that he saw, and his power sent forth the creation. So the first thing when he saw and his power sent forth creation is these personified Vedas, and these personified Vedas, the first thing they do is to glorify the Lord. So the next verse, I'll I think in the interest of time, I'm going to leave the translation. It is verse 19. So this verse, it says, apparently, the Shrutis say, apparently entering among the variegated species of living beings you have inspired them to act, manifesting yourself according to their higher and lower positions, just as fire manifests differently according to the shape of what it burns. Therefore, those of spotless intelligence who are altogether free from material attachments realize your undifferentiated, unchanging self to be permanent reality among these impermanent forms. So a few things to break down this verse, right? First thing, the Shrutis say Krishna is the cause of all living beings, and he's the creator, and Krishna is the one that inspires everybody to act. And we hear the analogy of sparks and fire all the time, and again here it's used as, we are just the sparks of the fire as it burns, and because the fire has different manifests differently and according to the shape that it burns, in each moment each of us have different manifestations that we are taking over, that we are taking, but just like the sparks of the fire, the core itself of the fire, which is the Lord, is undifferentiated and unchanging. So regardless of here the Shruti mantras kind of established that regardless of there being multiple manifestations, it's still Lord Krishna that is the center of it all. And then in the second section here, right, it says basically it says the only way we can realize the fire is by having spotless intelligence and by being free of material attachments. And practically, right, what does that mean? Right? So spotless intelligence is validating all of our thoughts and desires through guru, sadhu, and sastra, right? That's the ultimate way we'll know that we are doing the right thing and we're applying the right intelligence to everything that happens in our lives. And then the second thing is by being free from material attachment. Through detaching from, and the only way we can be free from material attachment, right, is we can first have to be detached from the material world, but detachment alone isn't enough. We have to then attach ourselves to the lotus-feet devotees, attach ourselves to Krishna. So in this verse, the Shruti mantras are just they're building how Krishna is still the Krishna is a supreme controller, and we in the material world we are just sparks, manifestations of portions of his of him. So the next verse is 22. So in this verse, the Shrutis kind of they really talk about how in the material world we are sucked into illusion, right? So in the verse itself is when this human body is used for your devotional service, it acts as oneself, friend, and beloved. But unfortunately, although you always show mercy to the conditioned soul and affectionately help them in every way, and although you are their true self, people in general fail to delight in you. Instead, they commit spiritual suicide by worshiping illusion. Alas, because they persistently hope for success in their devotion to the unreal, they continue to wander about this greatly fearful world, assuming various degraded bodies. So, in this verse, it very clearly says, right, what's the downfall of being trapped in the material world. Our true desire, right, is to be loved, and I think the root of all of our desires is to be loved and show love. But in the material world, we pursue this false love. We're ignorant. We think we know better. We are hard-headed, and our soul is covered in lifetimes of dirt because we've been pursuing this illusion of false love. But if we practice devotional service in this verse, it says the same body that the same bodies or bodies that we've been using to pursue illusion, it can be our friend, our beloved, and it can be our true self, which is where we've established our relationship with Krishna. And why is that, right? And in the verse it says it's because Krishna is full of mercy and affection, and he always shows mercy to the conditioned souls and always shows affection to help them in every way. But even though Krishna does that, and he desires that we come back to him and come back to Godhead, in this verse it says that we clearly commit spiritual suicide. We refuse to take the next step. That Krishna is the supreme, and that happiness doesn't come from just doing material things or pursuing what our senses desire or through sense gratification. So that in this verse, right, to answer the Shrutis are still building up to the answer of how should somebody that Maharaj Prashant's question of how should somebody understand the Vedas, right? So how should somebody understand the Vedas when Krishna is ununderstandable or beyond understanding? So here it says it's the main ingredient is faith. That's the only way we'll be able to truly understand the Supreme Lord, understand Lord Krishna, is through that faith that we so lack, because in because we lack that faith, we basically end up doing this spiritual suicide. And the interesting thought came to me that, from if we're just pursuing material things in this world, when we should have this understanding, there's really no difference between like material suicide and spiritual suicide, because regardless of what we do in the material world, we'll still end up in the cycle of birth and death. And we're essentially not doing what our body and what our life is meant for. So if we devote our energy to serving illusion, we'll always be degraded, we'll always be fearful, we'll always be full of duality, and we won't be able to ever escape from the three modes of material nature. So the other thing, right, is in Ishopanishad, it's clearly said that if we don't recognize Krishna and we don't recognize like the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the Ishavasana principle, that everybody, as Krishna has given everybody what they need, and you should only use kind of what is allotted to you. It's that you're basically the killer of the soul, which is again in the previous verse. In this verse, it says it's spiritual suicide, right? And in this verse in Ishopanishad, it says the killer of the soul, whoever he may be, must enter into the planets known as the worlds of faithlessness, full of darkness and ignorance. So that's the material world. So so the next verse here is the Shruti mantras here are basically saying that so if you're on the platform of goodness at this point, right? So you understand that by pursuit of material things you can't get anywhere, and by not surrendering to Krishna you can't get anywhere. The next step is to automatically start to inquire about the Lord, right? So in this verse, what I took away is several things. So I'll read the translation first. So everyone in this world has recently been born and will die soon. Will soon die. So how can anyone here know him who existed prior to everything else, and who gave rise to the first learned sage Brahma and all subsequent demigods, both lesser and greater? When he lies down and withdraws everything within himself, nothing else remains. No gross or subtle matter or bodies composed of these. No force of time or revealed scripture. So in this verse, it talks about how even Brahma, the demigods, right? They're the first things, and they're the highest learned people that are in the material universe. Even they have to die, and they have to stop existing. Same like everything in the material world. So if even they cannot understand Krishna, or they cannot understand the Supreme World, how can we, in the age of Kali, in our short lives, how can we ever hope to understand how can we ever hope to answer, Maharaj Parikshit's question, right? Which is, how could we possibly understand Krishna? And so in our short lives, it's difficult to even understand the material world, right? We can't even, there's so many things that we don't know about the material world. So what to speak of the spiritual world? What to speak of Krishna? So in this verse, there are two things, right? One is it's emphasizing how short the world is and how short our lives is, and the other thing I took away is so if you want to inquire about Lord, then the next step is to possibly pursue Jnana Yoga, right? That's what Prabhupada says in the purport is, in this verse, we can take away that even pursuing Jnana Yoga is very difficult, because we're in this short life, and everything in the material world has recently been born and will soon die, right? And even Brahma and demigods, all of them who are learned, they have to stop existing. So pursuing Jnana Yoga is difficult, and that's not the way we can truly understand Krishna through the Vedas. So then the next verse is also very similar here. The Shrutis basically they defeat Mayavada philosophy of oneness, right? They explain that the what's wrong with understanding the world in that way, and it also clearly says in the verse what is false understanding, right? What is not true about Krishna, and what is not true about the material world, and what's not true about the spiritual world. So in this verse, so I'll read it. Supposed authorities who declare that matter is the origin of existence, that the permanent qualities of the soul can be destroyed, that the self is compounded of separate aspects of spirit and matter, or that material transactions constitute reality, all such authorities base their teachings on mistaken ideas that hide the truth. The dualistic conception that the living entity is produced from the three modes of nature is simply a product of ignorance. Such a conception has no real basis in you, for you are transcendental to all illusion and always enjoy perfect total awareness. So you can see here, right? The verse lays it out. So it says, and what I took away is what it's telling us not to do, and what it's telling us is false understanding. So the first thing is that we're this body, right? Being attached to this body. The second thing is thinking that the soul is not permanent, right? That we as soon as the soul is that it's not a unique part and parcel, and then in kind of Mayavadi philosophy that the soul merges into Brahman, and Brahman realization. And then the third thing is that we cannot be existing without matter. So that the self is compounded of separate aspects of spirit and matter, and that's a false understanding, that because there is a spiritual world, and there is an abode where we can be without any material matter. And then finally, it's being tied to the fact that the material world is reality, right? So all of this in this verse, it says, is basically false understanding. It's the incorrect understanding of what not to think about, incorrect understanding of the true nature of Krishna, and so even if you're pursuing the path of Jnana Yoga, right, and you're trying to understand, these are some of the things you should avoid and you should not engage in. I'll go a little quickly because I know there's a few verses I have. So in this verse, there's the main takeaway here in verse 30 is that the Shruti says that the Shrutis say that Lord has mastery over all individual souls, and he controls the inner and outer worlds, right? So again, it's establishing that even if we pursue Jnana Yoga and we pursue all of these things about understanding, you want to get to a point where you don't have an opinion about Krishna. And in the purport, Prabhupada explains it very nicely. He says, he gives an example of a devotee that explains that you should not presume to know Krishna or have an opinion about Krishna. And what that means is, and conversely, having an opinion about Krishna means that we are truly not engaged in understanding or knowing Krishna. So it's the intermediary step of saying, okay, no, Jnana Yoga is not enough, because through Jnana Yoga you may develop your own opinion about what the spiritual Lord, who the Supreme Personality of Godhead is, and what the spiritual world is like. But that's a path of speculation, and that's not the path of truth, right? And the true path is that what the Shrutis say is that Lord has mastery over everything that we do. He controls the inner and outer worlds, and whatever knowledge that we hope to gain about the spiritual world and about the Supreme Lord, all of that has to come from directly from our understanding and relationship with Him. So the next set of verses, and I'll go quickly here, is it talks about how we can do this, right? And immediately the Shrutis say the only way is through the spiritual master. It's only through surrendering onto the lotus feet of our spiritual master, of somebody who's who's already spiritually realized, can we hope to ever progress in the path. And there's two things that it clearly says in this verse. It says, the mind is like an impetuous horse that even persons who have regulated their senses and breath cannot control, right? So practicing Ashtanga yoga here, it says, is not enough, right? Practicing even detachment is not enough, because that because the mind is like an impetuous horse, and even those things will eventually make us fall down, and we have many examples of that. And then those who, so the only way is through the spiritual master. And it says here, those in this world who try to tame the uncontrolled mind, but who abandon the feet of their spiritual master, will encounter hundreds of obstacles in their cultivation of distressful practices. So the other thing is true too, right? Is the reverse is true. So if we are surrendered to a spiritual master, then hundreds of obstacles will be removed from our progression towards Krishna consciousness. So the only way to truly understand and understand Krishna through the Vedas is through the spiritual master. I have 15 more slides, so let me go to maybe just the last slide here. Eventually, right, so the Shrutis answer the question of how to understand it, right? And then ultimately Narada says, Sri Narada Uvacha Namastasme Bhagavate Krishnaya Malakirte Yodate Sarvabhutanam Abhaya Yoshita Kalaha. Sri Narada says, I offer my obeisances to him of spotless fame, the Supreme Lord Krishna, who manifests his all-attractive personal expansion so that all living beings can achieve liberation. So there's really only way, right? There's only one way, and Narada says, or Sri Narada says it very clearly. It's through Lord Krishna, and the only way we can, and Lord Krishna is the only way that human beings can achieve liberation. So the only way we have is to surrender onto Lord Krishna. And in the last verse, right? What I took away from the very last verse in this chapter is Krishna gives us everything we need to achieve liberation. And in some of the purports, Prabhupada beautifully says it, of how like we have all the necessary senses to engage our mind and completely engage our mind in Krishna consciousness. We have eyes to just see things about Krishna. We have ears to only hear things about Krishna. We have a mouth to only speak things about Krishna. We have a nose to only smell things that have been offered to Krishna, or and whatnot. So everything that we have is we have hands and legs to use towards working for Krishna. So he's given us everything that we need to achieve spiritual realization, right? And in this verse, right, it talks about how the Lord has done all of these things. He's he watches over the universe. He's a master of unmanifested energy and the spirit soul. He creates the material world, but ultimately, by surrendering onto him, one can escape the embrace of illusion, just as a dreaming person forgets his own body. One who wants liberation from fear should constantly meditate upon him, Lord Hare, who is always on the platform of perfection and never subject to material birth. So I will conclude here. I think simply it's associate with devotees and read Prabhupada's books, chant 16 rounds each day, and then only honor prasadam and follow regulative principles, and chant and be happy. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Thank you, devotees, for listening. My apologies for going 7 minutes over. There were a few other slides that I will hope to go through some other time.
Hare Krishna, Prashanth Prabhu. Yeah, truly, I don't know how the time went so fast. Beautiful, beautifully explained the verses and the understanding. I did note down a few points I wanted to share, but I think since we are already over the time, I would just like to thank you for such a beautiful class, and especially really liked how you connected with the Upanishad and said, if we don't recognize Krishna, then we are killing our soul. So it is so important for us to understand Krishna. And when Brahmaji himself says he cannot understand, and how do we do in this short lifespan of ours? So beautiful realization and understanding, Prabhu. It was very deep. Thank you so much. With that, devotees, thank you all very much for joining the BhagavatSanga program today. And sorry we went over the time. We will see you all next week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Prashanth Prabhu. Very brilliant class. You scrutinizingly studied the verses. I could clearly see, and you have a very deep understanding of the verses. Very beautifully presented. Definitely, Prabhu, maybe you can book one more slot whenever it's available.
Sure, Prabhuji.
With Veena Mataji, and go through the next, other 15 slides, Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for the opportunity. Thank you, Mataji.